Welcome, everyone. My name is Rebecca Stemme. I'm the producer of live events here at LAist, and I am so happy to see you all here for our special live taping of Inheriting. This is going to be an incredible night, and I'm so happy you all are here to share it with us. Please welcome your host for the evening, the host of Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR network, Emily Kwong.
This is so cool. How's everyone doing? Yeah? Okay. Did you eat enough? Because I heard there's going to be takeout boxes. So if you want to take some food home, you can. All right. How many of you have been to a live podcast taping before? All right. We're not actually live. There's no audience watching us. But basically, you're going to get to see how a podcast gets made, and you'll be able to listen to the episode and say you were there July 11th. So we're going to begin. How's that sound? Good? All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to Inheriting Live. One more time. Welcome, everyone, to Inheriting Live. Yes. This is a special live version of the Inheriting podcast brought to you by LAist Studios and the NPR network. And I'm your host, Emily Kwong. Hello. Inheriting is a show about Asian American and Pacific Islander families, and is a show where the past is personal. I want to thank all of you for listening, for supporting the vision of this show, because sitting around you is actually the universe of season 1. We have 5 of the 7 families who participated in Inheriting here tonight. So give them a huge welcome, because they are some of the most incredible people I have ever met in my life, and their stories are gifts that they gave all of us. So I really want them to know that and feel that in the room tonight. Also here is the team that made Inheriting, those who edited and produced it and labored over it and made it sound as beautiful as it does. And finally, we also have some of our major donors. We have Jihi and Peter Ha here. We have Michael Yap here. We have Patricia and Stuart Kuo, who founded the Asian American Education Project. And we also have to thank Cathay Bank for their contributions. Also here are my wonderful colleagues from Shortwave, which is the other show I host. It's NPR Science Podcast. So, you know, if you want to check that out, that would be great. And finally, my parents are here. And my sister, who raised her hand and said, "What about me, bitch?" And my family from both coasts. We want this show, honestly, this show is more like a family reunion than a live podcast taping. And what's bringing us all together is the desire to talk about history, the urgency to talk about history. We called our show Inheriting for a reason. Not Inherited, that's a climate change podcast for kids. Not Inheritance. Inheriting, it's an action or a process of deciding what to do with what gets passed down to us. Let me take that again. It's an action or a process of deciding what to do with what gets passed down to us. And it's really conveyed in our show art, this beautiful image. You see like the bridge and the ripples and the intergenerational weaving together. That was done by Christina Chung. And we're gonna introduce you to some of the families right now. So, the questions we're all asking is, what does it mean to play an active role in history? How is the personal historic? How is the historic personal? And to explore that with me are 3 of those folks. All right, please welcome on stage Bao Trong from episode 4. And Leilani Wihongi Santos and Joseph of J.E. Santos from episode 7. And finally, we have Syra Saeed and Shakil Sayed from episode 6. We also have in the audience, if you don't mind standing up, Bo and Victoria Uch from episode 3. Yes, Bo and Victoria, you guys are so amazing. We're so happy you're here. And we also have Carol Kwong Park from episode 1 and 2. You have to stand, you have to stand. All right. Aren't they cool? I feel like now you get to meet them all the way I did. So we're going to, for the next hour, talk to these 5, Bao Trong, Leilani Wihangi Santos, Joseph of J.E. Santos, Cyrus Saeed, and Shaquille Syed about history and about their personal experiences with history. And we're going to start in 1975 in Vietnam.
I feel whenever I started being interested in, I feel homesick for Vietnam, and it's not even my home.
And a moment in history represented by a single photograph that hung in Bao's house growing up as a kid. A photograph of a Lockheed C-130 Hercules plane that was flown by Bao's father, Tuan Trong, who lives in Texas and could not be here tonight. Your dad was a pilot for the South Vietnamese Air Force and was at the base when Saigon fell. It was a moment of total chaos. The Vietnamese people who had worked with the Americans during the war feared for their lives. Everyone was running, and your dad told you his instinct was to run too.
The people, they just abandon the base, they try to fly away. Some of them, a lot of them, they fly out.
Tuan truly thought he was going to die until one of the other pilots he knew came over and said he had a plane.
He said, well, I have a C-130. You want to go with me? Be my co-pilot. And then, I'm so happy, and I jump in with him.
And he got as many people as he could onto that plane with him.
There were about 100 people inside, and even more were trying to climb into the cargo hold. So at some point, Tuan and his co-pilot had to decide when to shut the door. Otherwise, the plane would be too heavy to fly.
At that point, you don't have any idea who you're going to take. You don't have any idea. We in the cockpit, we just control, we just take off. But I thought we were going to fall. The airplane shaking so bad, I thought we'll about die.
But they didn't fall. Your father landed the plane successfully in Thailand and eventually settled in Texas, which is where he went to flight school at the start of the war. When we first spoke, Bao, you told me that if this moment had never happened, you would have never been born. What does this story of your dad's escape and him rescuing over 100 people mean to you now?
I think growing up, knowing that story, my dad was this larger than life character, where I was like, my dad's this hero. He saved all these people. And
you got free dental work because of it?
We definitely got a lot of, my dentist, it was free, but it wasn't, gracious, I remember having the thing that keeps your jaw open in my mouth for an hour. He'd forget about me. But it's fine. It's fine. It was, but yeah, and I think sitting down and talking with him, with you,
yeah,
I really learned just how scared he was, how he was really just acting on a sheer will to survive. Not that my dad's not a human to me, but it really made him feel more. It really humanized him in a way where I was like, my dad was just a kid who was just reacting. And I still think he's a hero, but it feels like for so long I feel like I had so much pressure in my life to how do I live up to my dad's actions. And I still feel that way. But now I feel like, his choice was the choice to survive. And so everything that we have after that is kind of this is a blessing.
Yeah. His actions, they gave rise to your beautiful family. This is your siblings and your mom. And you talk a lot in the show about this feeling of having a bisected identity, almost like two halves. The next slide, you sent these family archival pictures, and there was this
oh my God, I love that photo
image
so
of the two of you making
God, this is such a
plain
funny
arms
diptych.
at each other. You're making plain arms at like a kid's birthday party in Texas. Is that what's going on
Yeah,
here?
that's like my 10th birthday party, I believe.
Yeah.
It's the only birthday party I ever had until I was like 17, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And your dad's over here doing the splits with
Yeah,
the plain arms.
he sent me that photo just unsolicited one day with no text or caption. I was just like, just to me, not to anyone else. He just sent it to me, and I was like, Dad, where are you? And he's like, I'm in Hawaii, duh. Oh, okay. But I love this photo because I feel like it just really embodies who he is as a person.
Yeah. And you're kind of the same person to me.
Yeah,
you're
it's
like
scary.
mirror images.
Yeah, it's
Wait, why is it scary?
Well, I don't know. It's like I love my dad, and I wish I could be anywhere near as like the person that he is. But it's just like, so much of my life was spent like trying to be different from my siblings or my dad or whatever. And you just can't escape that. That's just you just become
yeah. Inevitably become a little like
which
your parents.
Is great. I'm happy.
I
about
love you,
it.
Mom and Dad. I love you, Dad. So, how did it feel to tell your dad, truthfully, Dad, the U.S. has never felt like home to me. I know you tried. You raised me here. You fought so hard to get us here, but it just doesn't feel like home.
In a lot of ways, I feel like he always felt that. In a way, like I think
that the U.S. didn't feel like home
because
to him.
I think that he recognizes in me something that is reflected in him. I feel
Wow.
like me and my dad are. I feel more so than my siblings. I feel like me and my dad are just like really. We see eye to eye in a lot of things. We're both artists. We both carry a deep nostalgia that we can't get rid of. And I feel like he's always known, but at the same time, I feel like telling him that was really scary because I didn't want him to think that that it was like it wasn't worth it, or I'm ungrateful. And so, but I feel like he understands that. I think my big question to him was like, how am I supposed to reconcile these feelings of feeling placeless because the place that we are isn't home, and the place that is home is not home anymore. Where do we go?
Right.
I'm still trying to figure out that answer. So
I was so glad you did open up to your father about it so he could know you a little better. And you had shared that while listening to the story, you had a moment of knowing him better too. You talk in the show about having inherited his nostalgia for Vietnam, this country that, you wish you could live in, but never knew growing up, in the country that he lost before the war. And I want to listen to that moment in the episode that you said, as a listener, you were like, oh, this dude is deep. My dad has stuff going on. Let's take a listen to that.
making my own friends as an adult in Vietnam really made me feel like I was home.
Wow.
I remember sitting in a cafe and it was pouring rain, and I was just sitting there drinking probably my third or fourth iced coffee of the day and smoking a cheap cigarette, because that's what everyone does there, just smoking a cigarette, drinking coffee and waiting for the rain to pass and really feeling in tune and in time with my surroundings. And in that moment, I think of just sitting in that cafe doing something so simple as waiting for the rain to pass. I felt life in all of its slow beauty.
Did you feel like the two halves were uniting?
I definitely felt reunited with my missing half that I didn't realize was there the whole time. Nowadays, I think Vietnam calls to me every day. Yeah, so after listening to the episode, I feel like not that I misinterpreted what that moment felt like, because sitting there and kind of feeling the rain and really just soaking up all of the beautiful banality of that moment.
This is during your 2016 trip to Vietnam, your first kind of solo trip as an adult.
Yeah. And I felt like I had this feeling of comfort of home, and I felt like it was because Vietnam was kind of where I was spiritually meant to be, or always was. But after listening to the episode, I think what I realized was the reason that I felt so comforted wasn't necessarily because I felt comforted by the place, but I felt comforted because I felt like I was closer to my father in that moment. If that makes sense. Like I felt like I was. It's so hard to talk without like all this like wobbling and like this stuff happens.
You feeling
up
a
here,
little?
like, what's going on?
The waters are rising.
I
here.
don't know.
You're
like,
reminding me of my first time in Taiwan. I smelled the smell in the airport, the garlic and the spring onions and and I started crying because it reminded me of my grandparents' house. And they died when I was 5. But it was a moment of like, I feel closer to them because of a sensory experience.
That's exactly what it is. It's being able to sit there like alone and just really just for a moment lose myself in kind of this place that is what the thing that I've always heard about, you know?
Yeah.
I think I just felt really, really close to my parents and understood kind of what they left behind. You know, like I ask myself these questions all the time, like, what does it mean to like grow up as a child of refugees, you know? I think about things like we talk about inherited nostalgia a lot, about having like this homesickness for this place I've never known. Like, what is that? I think a lot about this feeling of like, you talk about how my parents met over in the States, and so I'm like without the fall of Saigon, like I wouldn't exist, like whatever, making it all about myself. But here we are. But in a way, I feel that's true, and kind of what, I think about that. I'm like, this question I've been asking myself since we did the podcast is, am I like this promise of this dream like yet to be realized, or am I like this like constant reminder of like this nightmare that can't be forgotten? Like, what do you do with that?
What are you going to do with that? As your dad said, sorry, not sorry.
He did say that. He did sorry, not sorry me.
And the guy was like, well,
during the episode.
that's your cross to bear about. Good luck with that.
But, I'm very thankful to have such like my dad is so emotionally intelligent. He's very in tune with his feelings. He would always tell me he loved me and hold my hand, and he writes poetry. Like, that's great. What the hell?
We're so grateful to you both. Thank you so much.
But yeah, I'm really happy that we got to do this. So thank you so much for like providing that bridge for us.
It was an honor. Okay, well, because woo! You have to understand, these interviews are typically like 2 hours long, so this is really weird for me, because once we get like locked in, I'm like, I want to hang out here for 2 hours. But all right, because this is a live podcast taping, we're going to get some BTS content, not the K-pop band though, like behind the scenes content. So I'll be recording mic breaks like this. Oh my gosh. You're listening to a special live version of Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR Network. I'm your host, Emily Kwong. We'll be right back. All right. And now you're going to applaud real loud again. Welcome back to Inheriting. Our show's special live event. I'm your host, Emily Kwong, and I want to turn it over now to Leilani Wihangi Santos and Joseph of J.E. Santos, who are at the center of our episode about Guam, which dropped today. So if you haven't listened, you'll be forgiven, but you must listen the moment you leave this building. Leilani and Joseph, I just want to thank you both so much for being willing to talk about this history, because it's so seldom discussed in public spaces like these. What happened on Guam, what's happened in the Pacific Islands. You are just very special people. So thank you. I want to focus on the year 1941. Guam is the homeland of the Chamorro people, and it's an island with a long history of colonialism and militarization. In 1941, that is when Guam fell under the control of the Empire of Japan. This was like the, outbreak of World War II. In the hours after Pearl Harbor, when Japan's army invaded the island of Guam, they imposed a brutal 3-year occupation. And it's a history that, Leilani, you learned about in school.
There's these 2 massacre sites that you visit. And so these 2 massacres are called the Tinta and the Faja massacres. You're brought to these massacre sites to pay your respects.
On July 15th and 16th, 1944, soldiers massacred nearly 50 people in the Tinta and Faja areas. When she was in high school, Leilani stood on that ground. The massacres represented the hardship Chamorros endured, and she was taught they were rescued when U.S. forces overpowered the Japanese military.
Leilani, what was it like to grow up on Guam and be taught history this way?
I think when I was younger, I really didn't critique or think too deep into the education I was receiving up until maybe high school.
Yeah.
But I'm the first in my family to finish high school, so it's always been a priority for me to excel in school. And so as a child, the only thing I'm thinking is like, why would they teach me something that's not true? Obviously, they do that all the time.
It's like the biggest discovery about
I know,
history
it's like
education.
banned books. But yeah, it wasn't until high school that I started thinking about it more. And then in college, when I started reading critical works, is when I really had to reckon with the fact that having been educated on the island about Guam, and we'll get into this later, but about Japanese imperialism and U.S. liberation, what I realized later as I got older was that that education really affected my self-esteem. And this is actually a very common thing in Pacific Island communities, where we are taught that we are saved by a lot of imperial forces where, Japan was horrible. The U.S. could be bad, but it's better. And so we have to, just deal with that because it's better. It could be worse. And so that really affects generations of self-esteem, where we believe that we are incapable of protecting ourselves and of functioning on our own. We believe that we need to be dependent on other forces. And I'd realized that after, I had read Dr. Apeli Haofa. He's a critical scholar in Pacific Studies, and he writes about this, where Pacific Islanders are, we're raised to believe that our islands are so small that we're kind of insignificant because our islands are so small in terms of mass. And so he encourages us to instead think of it as Oceania. We're huge. Think of Oceania as the continent.
As its own continent.
Yeah, as its own. We're the biggest continent then.
Yeah.
And so that was a lot for me to unpack as a college student, where I was like, actually, because I did have that mindset where, if the U.S. isn't occupying us, another force will. That's our only option. And so now, though, you realize, before colonization, we were doing great. We were thriving. There wasn't poverty. People were sharing. Capitalism did not exist.
Yeah.
And so I think that really just affected my self-esteem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joseph, you're Leilani's grandfather. We're so honored to have you here. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
This young woman, you have known her, you've loved her whole life. What was it like for you when she started to question how history had been taught and started to really tap into this vein of oh, the American military's presence hasn't been all good for Guam?
Actually, growing up, we didn't really question it because it was the U.S. military. All they did was replace another force that we were forced to live under.
And you were still banned from speaking your language, right? The Chamorro language.
Yes, we weren't allowed to speak Chamorro. So growing up, my grandfather was the only one that would not speak to me in English. And from that's where I learned how to speak Chamorro fluently. And later on in life, even learned how to read and write Chamorro. But it was all from my grandfather on my father's side. And he was a big influence in my life. He taught me how to drive at first. And the pickup he had was where the starter was next to the gas pedal. So you had to twist your feet, to get it started. But
I could see you rocking around the island.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was just on our way to his ranch.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was out of
Wow.
the public, out of the main streets and stuff. But
Yeah.
it was a good learning experience. He taught me how to carry a rifle, a gun, shoot a gun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what we did was in the afternoon, we would or early in the morning, we would go out and weed the fields of corn and taro and stuff. And then when the sun got too hot, we would go out and check the traps for like the wildlife that was around the area. And after that, we would go back into the field when it was getting dark again. And we had just barrels of 55-gallon drums where we caught the rain from the troughs, and we just keep switching, and that's how we got our water. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was interesting because I didn't know that I wasn't exposed to another way of life, so I didn't think I was missing anything. Mm-hmm. I always thought I was so privileged because, around the village, the other kids would be, I guess, in some way, thinking back on it now, were envious of me because I had bicycles. I had a moped back in the 50s. It's and when I used to ride it, the kids would be running alongside of me, and I was over there oh yeah.
I see where the bike riding habit came from when you ate it in Vegas with Leilani.
Yeah,
rocking around your bike. Okay,
yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I mean, your family goes back so many generations. On Guam, Leilani would say your name when she wanted to enter the forest to get approval from the spirits. And Leilani, you had this really beautiful observation in your piece about needing to know the land's history because there's been so much erasure again and again and again by the Spanish, by the Americans, by the Japanese forces, by Imperial Japan's forces, and then by the Americans again. Let's just play that clip.
If you are on a land that has experienced a lot of trauma, especially if you are the people of that land, have you learned that land's history?
And you both do this. You recover the land's history and talk about its trauma when you remember the name of your aunt who was forced into a system of sexual slavery by the Japanese military. This is euphemistically known as the comfort women. We're going to listen to that clip right now.
In the war, a lot of my aunts were actually taken as comfort women for the Japanese. A lot of them were.
Did you know what that was when
No,
growing
because
up?
it was never really talked about. One of my aunts, her and her husband, when they got married, it wasn't a wedding that was celebrated. It was real hush-hush because she's like a property of the Japanese.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad. So which aunt was this?
She was my grandmother's youngest sister, I think.
What was her name?
God, we called her, God, I can't think of her name. Oh, sad. What was her name?
Well, I think it's interesting that they didn't talk to you about it a lot. Because it's just something very traumatic.
Yeah, it's something that they didn't really want to talk so much about because they want to leave it behind.
We're about to change the topic when Joseph faintly smiles.
Echang, that was her name.
Oh, you remembered. What is it?
Auntie Echang. Yeah.
Yeah. You told me that this was the moment you were most proud during the whole interview. Do you remember saying that?
Not really.
I wanted to ask you why, but maybe a different question I could ask you is, Auntie Echang was your elder, and it kind of felt like she was in the room with us in that moment. She entered the chat.
Yeah.
Auntie Echang was there.
Yeah.
Now that you're an elder, what do you hope Leilani does to carry on the culture to future generations? What do you wish for her?
I'd wish for her to maybe go back home, and firsthand experience would be, I guess, the best way to preserve the culture. And you can't preserve a culture if you don't preserve the language. That's been my experience. So if you keep the language, you keep the culture. Excuse me. So I would wish that for her, because like a lot of my generations they're gone. You know, like
Yeah.
there's nobody I can look up to verify like things in the past because they're no longer here.
Right.
So a lot of those things is like soul searching on my own, and makes it difficult. But I think if I was back home, there's still elders there that I can reach out to, and they can help me like relate to some of the things that are still like I'm uncertain of. You know, like on the way up here, Lonnie was asking me, do I recall where our name came from? And I said, I never questioned it because that was our name.
The Santos name.
Right, yeah.
Right.
But I guess it's not indigenous to the island. You know, it's not like a Taitingfung or a Kumatau.
So you wonder if there's a colonial element to
it.
it?
Somebody snuck in, you know.
Somebody snuck in. That's a way of saying it. I mean, Leilani, I think your papa really looks up to you. He's kind of told me that before. You are such a caretaker for your family. There's this amazing photo of you tending to your family's grave site, and yours is the only Pacific Islander story we had this season, and something you and I and the whole team have really been talking about is how to have more Pacific Islander stories be a part of season 2, be a part of this project. What would you say to anyone who's on the fence about sharing their story and interviewing their relatives who identifies as Pacific Islander?
I would say, in terms of interviewing family, that is such a foundational practice in Pacific Island cultures. We are a people of oral histories, and I feel like, especially for those of us in the diaspora wanting to connect back to our homelands, you need to have a solid understanding of your own family. Like, what island is your family from? Can you figure out your lineage? Like, these are really important things. And for those of us in diaspora, one of the things we love to do to connect back is get our tattoos. And a big important step in getting your tattoo, because tattoos are a form of language, it's our form of writing and preserving histories, is learning your lineage, because our tattoos have meanings. And usually it's about your social status in the community, your lineage, where your family comes from in regards to the islands. And so, you know, it's not just an aesthetic, and that's usually like one of the first things we like to do. But I think if we are trying to do it very genuinely and just be very cognizant of how we're connecting, that's a foundational thing. And then also just in terms of having our stories brought out there, it's really difficult as Pacific Islanders because of the AAPI label. There was a bonus episode that came out today with Sefa Aina.
We both just fangirled Sefa Aina.
Yeah. Please listen to that. It's great. It's about the histories of how the term AAPI came to be and like the ramifications of that. A lot of times Pacific Islanders are erased in these spaces. It usually tends to be just Asians. And so that I'm going to a banquet this weekend for, it's called AAPI, it's the Asian Pacific Americans Library Association.
Yeah.
They had a literary award every year actually. And in the last 23 years, they've never awarded a Pacific Islander despite it being an Asian Pacific award. And so this year, 5 other Pacific Islander librarians and I were able to have meetings and basically harass them like, hey, we've never had
this should
a
be
Pacific
like
Islander. So we've changed the rubric, we've changed the requirements, and we're hoping that this pushes Pacific Islander stories to the forefront, that we're recognized, because by erasing us in these spaces, you're telling us that like our stories are not important and are not worth being heard. And that's, again, a really big thing to our self-esteem. So I'm hoping by spearheading these, folks feel more comfortable coming out and sharing their stories, because it is important. And yeah, I just keep doing the work. Like it'll happen eventually. It's annoying, but it'll come.
We are cheering you on. Good luck. Thank you so much, you both, for coming on and sharing your stories.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you for having us.
Do you see?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Joseph, how do we say thank you in Chamorro language?
Oh, yeah.
Shizuz Marcy.
Sinjus Masi. for Joseph and Larry.
You all are an amazing audience. Thank you so much. Because I really do just get wrapped up in them and I like forget about you. So thank you. All right, we're now going to turn to the story of Shakil Syed and Syra Saeed.
Shaquille not spending as much time with them in whatever. They were not being kids, they were being monsters. What did I really get into?
The historical moment we're going to focus on is September 11th, 2001. You were living in Culver City at the time, and your kids were very young. That day, Shakil, he had work at Islamicity, which is an online Islamic community website that was seeing basically a surge in traffic that day, a lot from defense circles, wondering what the Islamic faith was, failing to understand it. And Syra, you were homeschooling your two eldest, and that afternoon, your daughter, Khadija, had a soccer game. Khadija's siblings are here, so are probably laughing at this photo of their sister with her soccer ball. And there was this mental calculus you both had to do to decide if you were going to go to the soccer game, which was the same afternoon as September 11th. Let's listen to that.
And she said, we have this soccer practice thing. Should we go or not?
Because they were worried about backlash against them and their 7-year-old daughter, Khadija. Even though they knew the other families on the soccer team, they didn't know how they would be treated.
As a Muslim woman wearing a hijab and you've got kids and you go and what's going to happen?
And it took me kind of a snap. Heck no, hell no, we must go, we should go. And during the practice, we knew there were other parents, and they came and extended their support, basically, telling us that, we are here for you, and giving us hugs and so on and so forth.
But some parents who wanted to be supportive said things that were troubling.
So sorry to hear this happen to you. What the hell do you mean by me? Or to your people? Who are those people?
Shakil, you go on to say that there simply just wasn't the vocabulary at the time to kind of respond to this conflation with what was happening with the faith, and Islamophobia just ascended in the days after 9/11. And I want to ask you both, what has changed for you since 9/11, and what is still the same?
What has changed? I think for me personally, I feel more empowered and more secure to talk about my religion, why I wear this on my head. And I just feel that people are more aware and not afraid to ask questions. And for me, not to be afraid to answer those questions very honestly. And I think it has also made that generation that were small, like my kids, maybe more empowered to practice their religion and to show their religion for what it truly is, that we're not terrorists. And I think it gave them a way to show that and to be proud of who they are and where they come from.
Which they really learned from you both. I mean, in your parenting.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope I gave them that that way to think, to be proud of who they were, and to continue to be proud of who they are. Yeah. And what has not changed, I feel people still blame us as a whole, what had happened back then. I read the LAist comments.
Comment section,
yeah.
Never a good idea.
Still being called
sometimes.
a terrorist. After all these years of still being called a terrorist, it's It's quite amazing to me because as a Muslim community, we have, I feel, worked very, very hard to dispel those myths. And for people to still think like that, for our politicians to still think like that, it's kind of disheartening, but it makes you still stronger and more willing to show that, no, we are not terrorists. We are just like everybody else, and we hold on to our faith very dearly. What you see on the television is not who we are. Yeah.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shaquille, what about for you?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for asking, and thank you for giving us the space for us to talk. And thank you guys for being here this evening as opposed to listening to some old crazy white men. Yeah, so what changed? Well, I used to have hair in 2001. I don't have now. But no, I mean, a lot of stuff has changed. But the change has at different layers, right? So at personal level, at professional level, at community level, and at the societal level, and at the policy level, right? So the personal part, Sarah already, I think, covered the basis. At the community level, I think there's a great sense of maturity post 9/11. When adversity happens, it's human nature to fight back, for the most part, for most of us. And hence, Muslim community fought back. Wasn't easy. We paid a heavy price. But today, we see a great deal of maturity in the community, though they still live under the fear of policies such as Patriot Act, which many progressive administrations thereafter, George W. Bush, cemented it even more stronger against people who have the courage to stand up and speak truth to power.
Because the Patriot Act, of course, increased surveillance
of
all Americans, but especially Muslim Americans.
That's right. So we as a community were under the spotlight.
Yeah.
And we were surveilled extensively. They may still be here. My mind always goes, if Norma Loza is here, please stand up.
Right.
If James McLaughlin is here, please get the hell out
of
here.
Well, the FBI was like parked outside your house in a car, and didn't you chase them off, or?
Yeah, one time.
One time, okay.
But I owe a great deal of gratitude to my lifelong friend now, Ahilan Arulanantam, who is here, ACLU legal director back in the time.
Thank you for being here. Wow.
And it was me and Ahilan who would go throughout Southland along with another attorney at ACLU at the time, Ranjana Natarajan. We'll go and give presentations to community. Never speak with FBI. Never, ever speak with FBI. And they got pissed with this education.
The FBI did.
The FBI did.
Yeah.
So at the policy level, nothing has changed, frankly. It has been sanitized a little bit, but we still continue to live as a community of Muslim and Arab community under the threat of being watched, being surveilled, and so on. More so now after October 7th, when the genocide started unfolding in front of our eyes. So some things have changed, and a lot has not changed. I must also confess that in the process, Muslim community has gained extraordinary good friends, good people of good consciousness in this country. If it was not for that support either, who were not Muslims, who were atheists, who were agnostics, who were people of other faith groups, who stood up for the Muslim community.
Yeah.
I have said this in the episode that those of you who are of Japanese American descent here, we owe a debt of gratitude to you for what you taught us, what was going to happen post 9/11 based on what happened to you folks after the Second World War. And so on. I can go on rambling, but I think I answered the question.
Your work, I mean, this individual really was on the front lines of protecting Muslim communities throughout Southern California. I mean, when your story came out, the comments pouring in saying, Shaquille, we know him. He has fought for us for so long. And it was work that took you, I mean, to places that were very difficult. It took you away from home very often, nights and weekends. And Syra, you were parenting your 4 beautiful kids who are all grown up now, and 3 of them are actually here tonight, and saw all of this with their eyes too. You know, there was a moment when you were kind of solo parenting while Shaquille was away doing this very important work that you never told him about, and you share it in the episode for the first time. This is what you say to him.
They were just being kids, but in my mind, they were not being kids. They were being monsters and out of control monsters. And this is, you know, days of you know, leaving early, coming back very late, not seeing them. And I think I just came to a head, and I couldn't manage it anymore. And I said, I'm done. I'm over it. And I locked myself in our bedroom for a couple of hours and did a lot of soul searching. What did I really get into? And did a lot of praying.
I know this for a fact, obviously. I wouldn't be able to do an iota of what I did if it was not for the extraordinary and exceptional support by Sarah in my life.
I know it was so hard to share that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing it with me.
You're welcome.
And your husband and us. There are so many moms who've written in saying that they felt really seen by what you said. What gave you the courage to share this finally with your husband, your experiences after 9/11?
To be really honest, it was you.
Oh.
Now I'm putting you in that position. Let's see those tears roll down.
Do you remember when I called this Inheriting's Revenge?
Yeah.
The 5 of you?
There you go.
Oh, no. Well played.
She started as a journalist and ended up as a therapist.
Yeah. My therapist. No, truly. You know, I hadn't thought about it for a while, and then my second daughter, for whatever reason, Batul.
Hi, Batul.
Yeah, she keeps me on my toes. And I don't know why she had brought that up one time. And yeah, it brought it to the front of my brain. Wow, how could I be such a horrible mom?
Batul said no.
I don't know. She said no at the time.
Batul brought up the story of you locking yourself in the bedroom. She remembered it.
She remembered.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I can always count on her to remember everything. Yeah. But yeah, what was the question again?
What gave you the courage to share that story and maybe see it from a different point of view as like, I was struggling.
Yeah, you know, really helped me to bring that out where I could talk to Shaquille about it. It was something I, you know, felt very ashamed of.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel good that I could, you know, leave them out like that, go in my room and just not care about them.
Mm-hmm.
It was very heartbreaking for me. Even while I was sitting in there, but more I was thinking of, you know, how do I resolve my feelings, and how to just, you know, get over it, push it away, not think about it, and just move on and get out of this room and be a mom.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I did, and I pushed it in the back. And then, you know, doing this interview really helped me to understand that, you know, there are times where all mothers feel like this, you know, where their husbands are whatever job they're doing, or, you know, whatever is going on in the family life, that they're in those positions too. And I'm not the only one. And if doing this interview could help one mom, then, like they say, then I've done my job, kind of thing, right? And I had to be honest when doing this interview, not only for you and for the audience, but for myself, you know. And it helped me to talk about it and to realize that, no, I wasn't being a horrible mom, but I was just taking time out that I needed for myself. Probably not the best way of doing that, but that was the only way I could do it at the time.
I think there are many moms and parents perhaps in the audience who are like, no, I understand.
Yeah.
I mean, Bao was talking about survival.
Yes.
And I think about the generations of parents who did what they had to do to survive, which often meant shoving those feelings really deep down. And how I feel and how the team who made the show feels is you all just deserve space to heal and process and say, that hurt, that wasn't right, and maybe I don't want to do that anymore. So I really thank you for going there with me.
Well, thank you for bringing that out. Appreciate it.
You all are really kind of leaders and inspiration for so many generations of Muslim Americans who you know, your friends, your kids' friends, your colleagues. The last thing I want to ask you is, you know, your values have just been at the center of your lives from day one. It's how you came together in marriage. There's this great photo of you from your wedding day. Their love story's hella beautiful. You have to listen to it. It's this man bought flowers because he worked at a florist, and yeah, I said it. Anyway, but values. As Muslim Americans, how do you want the next generation to live out their values?
Beauty before age.
Oh gosh. Okay. Wow.
That's me then.
You're like, I'm Syra.
No, I feel this generation really has it in their power to uphold our values in many ways. They have it very easy because of people like Shaquille who have opened that pathway for them. And they should, you know, take the mantle now and run with it. And be proud of, you know, what generations before them have done, and move forward and just go for it and hold on to the Islamic values. Be proud of who you are, where you've come from, and let no one, you know, put you down or think of you otherwise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing that I would add to what Sarah said, with your permission, by the way, of course, which is, look, you know, all of us are so blessed. All of us can go home tonight, open our refrigerator, have choice of ice creams. There are 2 billion people in this world today who don't have a meal. Not the type of meal that you and I feel and believe and we know, a 4-course meal, right? I want young people to really recognize the extraordinary privilege that we are all blessed with. And then honor that privilege by using their time, their intellect, their talent, their resources for the greater common, larger good of the society. And then know that this journey is not very romantic. It's a pretty messed up journey. But at the end of the day, it's totally worth it. Sarah knew when I was spending extraordinary amount of time away from home that I was not doing this for the sake of fun and goofing around, but I was doing this for a purpose, though it was extremely difficult for her, and I confess and I apologize to her and my kids today in public space. But they know that I wasn't doing this for the sake of fun, but I was doing this for a purpose. And I believe that is inherited by our children through the inheriting story. So I'm deeply grateful to you and for my beloved wife for her extraordinary sacrifices that she has made. So it takes a village, as the adage goes, for us to do what we need to do. So I'm very proud of many young people in my community who have texted me, who have emailed me, who have called me and said, dang, we used to see you always smiling, riled up and pumped up, but we didn't know that you were going through this challenge in your family. Now, I did not know that I was going through this challenge in my family.
That's very honest. And you have colleagues from the South Asian Network here with you, you head up that organization.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so I did share this with the young colleagues, and they also reached out to me and said that, look, we learned a great deal from you, that it takes some intentional thinking and deliberate conversations with your spouse, with your family, that I'm going to be on this journey, because it does require extraordinary support and collaboration. I think I did say in the episode that I do have a red line. And my red line was, if God forbids, my family was going to fall apart, if she's going to dump me, I'll stop everything. If my children, God forbids, go south, I'll stop it. So I did have red lines in my head, and I would monitor that, I would keep an eye on that, but I would not waver from this commitment, because I knew that the modest contribution that we are making will help our kids inherit those values and look at us not merely as parents, but somebody who tried their tiny, tiny, tiny bit to make the world a little better place for somebody else.
I mean, the thing I just want to say is that it was the events of the world that put you in that position in the first place. You shouldn't have had to do that. I want to thank you all so much for your trust and participation in this project. You have changed my life. I've wanted to make a show like this my whole life, and I am really, really grateful that you were willing to go on this journey with all of us. I know they are too, but they don't have a mic in front of them, so they can't say it, so I will. Thank you so much. You're done. You can go sit.
Thank you.
Take your time getting off stage. The one rule is don't trip. Oh, please.
Yeah, so the program is over. I told you guys.
Oh, wait, we have half an hour more.
She tortured us for about 6 months over the course of life. It's time we pay back, right? So daddy and mommy, first of all, what a wonderful daughter you have raised. What a wonderful daughter you have raised. We are so deeply grateful for giving your legacy to her, and from her we learned so much. And we hope and pray that our children continue to grow like Emily. And Anjali, where are you, Anjali? And your baby to come.
Anjali Sastry-Kurbacek, the co-creator of this show, right back there, not raising her hand.
Thank you both so much.
Shaquille, thank you. Oh gosh. All right, well, oh my gosh, this is way harder than I thought. All right. You're listening to a special live version of Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR Network. I'm your host, Emily Kwong. We'll be right back. All right. Welcome back to Inheriting Live. This is a special live version of the Inheriting podcast from LAist Studios and the NPR Network. I'm your host, Emily Kwong, and I'd now like to welcome up on stage our consulting psychologist for Inheriting, Sherry C. Wang, and Carol Kwong Park from episodes 1 and 2. So, you both, gosh, should I do the part in the middle, Anjali, or should I just skip? No, skipping. All right. Thank God we're not live. I used to do live radio, and you have to be on all the time. So, you both really helped give me and the team the confidence to pursue this project. It's the honest truth. Because when we started, Sherry and I have known each other for years. After the Atlanta shooting in 2021, I was leading the employee resource group for NPR and was just at a complete loss because I didn't know how to support our Asian American colleagues in that moment. And we needed to talk to a psychologist. And Sherry, you met with me and everyone, offered resources on how to process that moment. And then when we came to you with this show idea, I was like, is it a good idea to ask people to interview each other about the past? Is it going to traumatize them? You were like, it's a good idea. It's always a good idea to talk about it. And then Carol, from episode 1 and 2, if you've listened, you know that Carol interviewed her own mom for years and wrote a memoir about it called Memoir of a Cashier. And, you know, when a lot of people listen to this show, the first question they ask me is, why should I do this? Why should I interview my own family members? What would you both say to that question?
If not you, who? You are the choice person to interview your family member, to collect that, and to be able to tell their story while they're here, but also beyond, because if not you, someone else will tell the story. And that story and that narrative is not going to center or know these details of your family members where they get to be centered, right, as the protagonist or the antagonist. But that story cannot be centered in a way where you know these intimate details, right, to really be able to really highlight their contributions, not just to your family, but probably to the larger society as well.
I didn't even think about that. What is the value of stories coming from within the community versus without?
Yeah, so there's a term, actually. It's a methodology term, but we also use it in multicultural psychology of edic versus emic, right? Edic really refers to stories told from the outside. So when outsiders look into your culture, your community, your family, and they tell the story of what they think they see, how they interpret you from their lens, versus the emic story. And these are the stories that you don't read in history textbooks that we were talking about in terms of U.S. imperialism. You're going to hear there's going to be one winner, and that's what we grow up listening to and learning about. And so that emic perspective is what we get from stories from our families, these untold stories, these not even untold, these stories that have been silenced, that haven't been even allowed to exist. They're not written because they weren't allowed to be written, or when they were written, they were burned or they were destroyed because they didn't want to be that evidence of that being a community's central narrative.
Absolutely. Carol, you assign interviewing relatives as an extra credit assignment for your students. You're a postgraduate student in ethnic studies right now at UC Riverside. Why do you assign it?
Honestly, because having gone through it myself, it's a selfish reason, but also because how else are you going to know your parents? How else are you going to know what they went through? And I never knew my own mom's story because she would never talk about it. It's the story from without, like you're saying. People are going to tell her story for her. And that model minority myth, that terrible myth, is what is being told about her all the time. So I had to investigate this. And when I assign this to students in my various classes, I teach classes as part of what I do as a student trying to get that doctorate degree.
Dr. Park.
Yeah, I don't know.
She'll come into being. She's just a dissertation away.
I'm just trying to live every day.
There we go.
Breathe. But when I assign it, I tell the students, it's going to change your life because your parents had this complete life before you were ever born. If they had you when they were younger, sure, they were still probably 20-something. Some parents were 30-something. I cannot imagine what your parents are going through. So when I assign it to the students, I tell them, be prepared. You're going to find out things about mom and dad that will shock you, change you, make you cry. It will change the way they see you and the way you see them. And that's what happened with me and my mom. And it was a cathartic experience. I finally understood why she grabbed that plastic crate box, put it in front of the little cashier's thing and said, you're double digit now, you can work. It's cathartic, and assigning it and doing it from that personal one-on-one family reason, I think is number one where we start.
Yeah.
Because it's a years-long process, and you will cry together, you will laugh together. There are things my mom told me that to this day, I think, God, how did she live through that? I wasn't even born yet. Wow. But for that reason, I assign it.
This is a moment now where if you've ever wanted to figure out how to do this for yourself, Sherry and Carol are here to answer your questions. So for the next 15 minutes, we're going to open it up to you all. We have 2 mic runners who are minor celebrities to the podcast, Minju Park and James Chow, who produced Inheriting. And if you have a question about interviewing your own relatives, now's the time to ask it. Just raise your hand, say your name, where you're from, whatever.
Hi, I'm Claudia, and I'm from Echo Park, and Indiana, by way of Echo Park. But so
hold that microphone nice and close.
Because we grew up in Indiana, my parents wanted us to assimilate, and they forbid us from speaking Korean. So, and then my mom, who is the only one surviving now, her English is very poor, and it's getting poorer as she ages. So I feel like I've asked her these questions, and she either says, I don't know, or she just can't. She doesn't have the words. So I would love to interview her, but I don't even know what to ask at this point since we don't have a common language.
I would say that's a problem that's going to be common, and it's okay. I would say ask her anyways. Have translator or someone whom you might know that be willing to sit there with you, or if not, asking a question of just starting off with, Mom, what was it like when you were a kid? And she might be like, I don't know, why are you asking me this question? That's what my mom was saying to me, like, for years. Why, don't bother me, go eat something, study, right? And I would be like, but Mom, I really want to know, be persistent. Because my journey with my mom took several years. I mean, we're talking almost 10 years. But really when I started to bug her for reals was when I was just very persistent. And asking her the very simple questions to start breaks the ice, and then later your mom's gonna see that you're on a mission, that you wanna know her. And eventually that Koreanness may break. And if it doesn't, it's okay. At least you can try. And that act of trying, of unfolding, will bring you closer, whether she speaks or not. But I would say, ask those questions, record what she's saying in Korean, because that's what I did. My mom would say things in Korean, I'd be like, wait, okay, I kind of understand that, because my dad was always very like, you're going to speak English only. She spoke to me in Korean, I speak Korean, but not as well as I'd like. So I would have someone translate it for me. So it might behoove you to do that and then go from there.
Yeah, I think that was in, Carol, your interview also, right, of how persistent you had to be, because it's these conversations, this is probably the psychological prep work you have to have going into it.
Oh yeah, you got to be determined. Because I interviewed both my parents, and that was, they were willing, but I had to be intentional.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have to keep persisting and keep persisting, because this is also kind of stigmatizing too, right? I mean, we don't talk about things in our families in general. I mean, we just don't talk about just general culture, not even talking Asian Americans. How you doing? Fine. No, I'm not fine, but you've already walked away, right? I mean, that we don't really talk about how are we really doing? And so when we're doing that with the people who are most intimate and close to us, it's going to be hard. And I think that older generation too, I think about older generation, it's parents, grandparents, they came to make space for us, to just give us a space and an opportunity. And then they really kind of did have to shut up and put up, because they were busy trying to put a roof over our head and to help us be able to assimilate, to adapt, to blend in, to survive here. And now, generations later, we are like, wait a minute, not only do I have a seat at the table, I can speak at the table.
Yeah.
My voice should be just as loud as that person. Wait a minute, I can lead the table, right? Yeah. And it's not because our last generation wasn't good enough, but they had to secure a spot at the table for us. Their jobs were different. So they may not have the, emotional intelligence or the EQ that we have, because we have had such a different kind of learning opportunity here.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean they don't want to. And I think every time you ask, it's a bid that they'll see to be like, oh, she wants to get to know me. Oh, he really cares. This isn't just a casual thing, but you're breaking the culture of kind of being superficial,
or almost breaking the power system.
Yeah,
too.
Yeah, right? And of the ways where we show love, too, which is, have you eaten? The deeper thing is like, how are you?
I do think snacks are really good for these interviews, by the way. We have a handout. Did anyone here get that handout on the way in? Great. we have this incredible handout for how to interview your own relatives, and you'll see the necessity of water and breaks and snacks and respecting boundaries. So something we asked all the families before their interview was, is there anything that's off limits? Anything you don't want to talk about? And then in the conversation, if you ask a question and your parents like, or your grandparent or your chosen parent is like, really being like, oh, okay, I'm not going to push it. I'm going to turn away from it is important. And it helps ensure that trust, I think.
And safety,
And
right?
safety.
What we're talking about is actually trauma-informed practice.
Trauma-informed practice, yeah.
Yeah. And snacks are a must.
Snacks are a must. What other questions do you all have? Raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. Tim! Hi! Tim and I have known each other since we were teenagers.
When did we start school again?
We started
You
school.
started a year
I
ahead
think
of
I've
me.
known you since you were 14.
Yeah, so, oh my God. It's
Look
been
at us
20
now.
almost 20 years now. That's crazy. You look great. Hi, my name is Tim. I'm originally from Fairfield, Connecticut. I now live in El Sereno on the east side. So I've actually done this once with my mom before for a school project in college. The only problem that I have now is when Emily first told me about this project, I've been thinking about it like nonstop. And I've been wanting to revisit it. I still have the old documents. I still have the voice recordings. But the only problem that I have with it is, well, two problems. One is how do I ensure the psychological safety of both myself and my parents, right? Because the issue that I have when I do this with my mother is that you can be a Buddhist and be a vegan and a monk, but you can also beat your kids. So like there are levels to that where my mother has to now reckon with the fact that her actions are diametrically opposed to the teachings that she gave me, right? And then the second piece to that is the stories of my parents are oftentimes not the ones that I've seen. So like no one is telling that story. They were refugees here in 1979, so 4 years after Saigon fell. And so a lot of their discussions are very much like, well, it doesn't matter because no one really did it like us, so just let it go. And for me, it's very easy to be like, okay, well, I don't want you to like relive war trauma. Like that's not fun. But at the same time, like you said, like who is going to tell this story, right? There's no remnant of our family left. We literally just have us because we're refugees. Like my parents' have been long since passed. So I guess my two-parter is like, how do I ensure the psychological safety of both myself and my parents within that like diametrically opposite belief system, and then also having them recognize that the story that that I want them to tell or that I want them to preserve is worth telling.
Tim, that's a fantastic pair of questions that I think probably a lot of people in the audience have. So thank you for voicing that.
It's a great question. And I think that really speaks to the beauty of the fact that our families evolve too, right? That our parents evolve, that our grandparents evolve, we evolve too. And so there is a piece to it of going back into the present, talking about really hard, painful, dark things. And the beauty in that storytelling together is we can come back to the present. And that speaks to then the relationship that you have. And if you don't have it now, then the relationship you build to be able to go back in time, come back to now, go back in time, and do that kind of back and forth in ways where, because you're kind of checking too, right? Is our relationship okay now? Do you forgive me now for the things I've done before? And so this is where the healing is mutual, actually, right? We in kind of racism, oppression work, there's a psychology of radical healing framework that really speaks to kind of collective, that healing is collective. And this is why I think, as Carol was speaking, right, that it's very transformational, right, for both yourself as the interviewer and the interviewee to be able to go back in time and talk about hard things. And then you both grow together to be like, oh, that's why you hit me the way that you did, right? Oh, you didn't know what you were doing. Well, did you know what the impact of that has been for me? And so there's an understanding, and there's going to be regret, and there's going to be loss, right? And there's going to be a lot of pain. But then that speaks to what can we do now in our relationship? And what do we want to do for the future generation and for our communities? And so there's a piece that isn't just about we go back just to go into the pain, but then we come out of it together, stronger, and with together, right? In that mutual learning to build a better future. There's hope, a collective hope for kind of everybody to heal.
And to add on to the psychological care and well-being, honestly, I was in therapy for a long time. I would say, if you can, seek the resources. So when I assign this to my students, I tell them there's on-campus resources for you to access, places where you can talk about what you're unpacking with mom and dad or with a family member. For myself, it was talking to a therapist. And then the psychological care that you can have between you and your mom in that moment is to express to her, at least this is what worked for me. It may not work for you. It'll be different for everybody. But for me, it was just explaining to her that her story was relevant, that her voice was relevant. And I'm going to try not to cry. When I was interviewing her in her last years of life, because she passed away a few years ago, just a year after the book was published, I told her that this reason, your voice, what you did, if you explain to them why you need to hear what they did, if it was good or bad, you need that reasoning. They're going to start to think about it and go, well, what did happen here? Maybe they do need that explanation before I leave this earth. And so me and my mom, we came to that kind of understanding. And it was this collective healing where mom finally said to me after so long, thank you. 수고했어. Thank you for all the hard work that you did. And I was like, are pigs flying? Did hell just freeze over? Did she just thank me for the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years? But that was the result of us taking care of each other. Now, that may not happen. And that's why I'm saying you might have resources that you could access beyond, right? Maybe you're going to rely on a family member, a sibling, or someone. But for me, it was seeking the therapy outside of that, because we were unpacking these very traumatic moments in my past of gunshots, murders, and witnessing these things and almost dying. And so I had to go to therapy. So if that's the case, I would say if you have that ability, seek that care.
The key outcome of this actually is humanizing your parent, right? Or whoever you're interviewing. And for them to also see you in this humanized way, not like, I have to protect you from trauma. We don't talk about this to protect you, but to really be like, okay, you're grown and I can tell you why I did what I did or why our family's gone through it. So there's a humanizing, right, of both parties in that way where that's the outcome, but the hard part of that, the dark side of that is you will see their human sides in ways where you're like, I don't know if I like that part of you. And they may not like those parts of them, but that is the humanizing part that comes out of it, to then see them in all of their complexities and for them to see themselves in those complexities. Yeah. I think about what Sarah was saying of it took Emily interviewing to be like, was I a bad mom? To be like, no, I'm not a bad mom. But somebody has to ask the story, right? Yeah. And then you tell it and then you hear it again. And there's something about that you humanize yourself.
Right. It gets reflected back to you.
Yeah.
But in like through a prism of someone else's love for you.
Yes.
I mean, I feel very lucky. I have two incredible parents that I feel completely safe with. And I interviewed them both about different things that we talk about on the podcast. But I do recognize that for some people, their parents, because they were abused by their parents, interviewing their parents is not an option. I always think about Stephanie Fu's book, What My Bones Know, which is a phenomenal book about complex PTSD. Stephanie interviews other members of her family. So if you want to interview someone and a parent is not an option, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a sibling, it doesn't have to be, the person who gave you life. It could be a grandparent who loves you and can provide some of that context of your own history that maybe you've been missing. Yeah. I think we are actually out of time. We have time for one very quick question. Yeah. Usra, is there one more microphone we can provide? Thank you, James.
Hi.
Oh.
It is. Okay. Yeah, it is on.
Say your name.
Hi, I'm Yusra. So I'm of Sri Lankan descent, but my parents had to leave Sri Lanka because of the civil war. And like Muslims in Sri Lanka are such a tiny part of the population, and because of some of the persecutions that they experienced during the war, they sort of held on to their Muslim identity and kind of let go of their Sri Lankan identity. And that's true for a lot of Sri Lankan Muslims. And I think also just the Muslim experience, as we heard with the sites, it's very racialized across the world. Like people see you and they just only see you as that. But I've been very curious about exploring my Sri Lankan side and sort of Sri Lankan Moor ethnic identity. What are some of your tips for that? Just because I feel like there's like a lot of trauma that a lot of my family members have because they never felt that sense of belonging in Sri Lanka because there's such a minority.
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
How to separate that out.
Well, why do we have to separate it? Right? I mean, but to think
True.
that we have to separate these parts of ourselves, even that's an identity wound in and of itself of oppression, right? Like, am I Muslim or Sri Lankan? And you're both and more. But that story hasn't been written. And it's kind of similar, that assumption of like, we're so little in number. What is our story? What does it matter? But actually, your story, right? It may not speak to other Sri Lankans per se or Muslims, but it probably would have an appeal to maybe others, right, who listen and may find it really connecting. So I think the start to where it is may be exactly what that lived experience is like, because that's what we're talking about today, right? There's not enough about us in terms of our lived experiences, our intimate family experiences. And that's really kind of where it begins, right? Well, in some ways, feeling like we deserve to talk about it.
I'll say this. We're both journalists. We're both public radio journalists. And I had a quote on my desk from Father Greg Boyle, who I think is a Jesuit priest. Oh, and it said, it was some variation of act like the truth is true and go where love has not yet arrived. And that is kind of the part that is the most closed off is actually maybe the part that needs the most love and attention. So I think you can feel very confident in that because it's coming from such a good place. Thank you so much for your question. That's all the time we have. We have to do some retracts, I think, for this episode. But I just want to thank Carol Kwong Park and Sherry C. Wang so much. Give them one big round of applause. And thank you. And find them after if you have more questions. We're just gonna, you can hang out with me while I do these retracts. Do you want to? Okay. Do I have any retracts? I have 4 retracts. Oh my gosh. Well, you know, the secret of inheriting, probably you figured this out right away, is that it's like made by this giant team. And Anjali Sastry Kurbacek is the co-creator of Inheriting with me. And Minju Park is one of our producers. Oh my gosh. I wonder, should we send the audience home or should I do all of these right now? All of these? She just gave me a thumbs up and a big smile. All right. And the team who produced, edited, and made Inheriting, also in the house, the major donors who made Inheriting possible, Jihi and Peter Ha, Stuart and Pat Kuo, who founded the Asian American Education Project, as well as Michael Yap. A big thank you also to Cathay Bank for their support. Once again, thank you to the major donors who made Inheriting possible, Jihi and Peter Ha, Stuart and Pat Kuo, Michael Yap, and to Cathay Bank for their support. One retract done. Here we go. Coming out of the bow answer, what was your revelation? Imaginary bow. Oh, someone left their phone in the chair. Are you having do you want to get your phone? All right, what was your revelation? Oh, I left my phone in the chair. All right. You're listening to a special live version of Inheriting from LAist Studios and the NPR Network. I'm your host, Emily Kwong. We'll be right back. Okay, Shaquille, you go on to say that there simply wasn't the vocabulary at the time to respond to people wrongfully conflating these attacks with the Islamic faith. Islamophobia just ascended in the days after 9/11, and I want to ask you both, what for you has changed since 9/11 and what is still the same? Wow, this is like a highlight reel. Okay. Bao, Leilani, Joseph, Syra, and Shaquille, thank you so much for joining us. I am forever grateful for your trust and participation in this project. I get to thank you again. How nice. Sherry C. Wang, our consulting psychologist on Inheriting, based at Santa Clara University, and Carol Kwong Park, a postdoctoral candidate in ethnic studies at UC Riverside and the focus of episodes 1 and 2. All right. You're going to have to applause one more time. Welcome to Inheriting Live. I'm your host, Emily Kwong. This is a special program of the Inheriting podcast from LAist Studios and the NPR Network. You're listening to a special bonus episode in which we're passing forward knowledge that our Inheriting team learned from your work, learned from our work on our show to you. And before we go and send you off into the night, I want to thank that team personally. Would you do me the grace of like 1 minute of thank yous? Our executive producer is Catherine Mailhouse. You can hold your applause. Our producers and sound designers are Minju Park and James Chow. Thank you also to the Chow family who's all here tonight. Our senior editor is Sarah Saracen, who pored over scripts with me for like hundreds of hours to make this show and is kind of the reason it sounds the way it is. And finally, our senior producer and co-creator of Inheriting, Anjali Sastry-Kurbacek. It took a whole community of makers and donors to manifest this show, so thanks from the bottom of my heart to all who were a part of it, especially our engineer, Donald Paz, our visuals editor, Samantha Helu Hernandez, who did all the photos you see, our fact checker, Caitlin Antonios, social media and video by Christine Malixi and Josh Latona, Jens Campbell is our production coordinator, Patricia Tumong is our senior marketing manager, and Shana Naomi Krochmal is our vice president of podcasts. Big thanks also to our LAist Live Events team, including John Cohn, Rebecca Tummy, Kristen Payne, Tony Federico, Kristen Ranger, Laura Dukes, and Michael Leva. If you would like to provide feedback about this event, there's a survey. There's apparently a QR code, so raise your phone and take a picture. And before we send you off into the night, just know that LAist is entirely funded by supporters like you. So if you feel moved to give to more seasons of Inheriting, go to our website, laist.com/inheriting. Right now, your donation will actually be matched dollar for dollar by, by Jihi and Peter Ha. I'm your host, Emily Kwong. Catch the entire season 1 of Inheriting now wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great night, everyone, and thank you for listening. Oh, Rebecca Stummy. Rebecca Stummy. All right, have a great night, everyone, and thank you so much for listening.